Alright, welcome to Word Choice, PortCon at Home 2020. My name is Jam Blue. I will be presenting this for you today. I got up in a little bit of a cosplay so we can kind of have that con experience, hopefully, and see how we do from there. So first, why would you even listen to anything that I have to say about word choice? First off, I have my bachelor's in creative writing. It's a very fancy, very expensive piece of paper that says, I'm a huge nerd. I've been hosting panels at New England conventions for an eternity now, and honestly been meaning to do digital ones for a while, so technically, this is a boon for me. Also, as certified, I am a complete dork. There's a whole motley assemblage of icons there and my website where you can find a bunch of other information and a bunch of nerdy stories for you. So there's tons out there that you can browse through and comment at me, that sort of thing. I love to talk, as you've probably figured out already. So, first, quick rundown of everything I'm going to cover for today, with word choice and writing and all of that. I am doing this in a very literary sense, but it works very well for high-lit RPing as well, if you're trying to expand more on that, but it's applicable for fan fiction or creative writing, original stories, role-playing, the whole nine. So, the way I set that up is I have two personal rules that I follow, just as in general, and then I usually look at things like redundancy, make sure I take care of that. Then I make sure I give some words a little bit of oomph. That's my special touch that I recommend other people do as well, but to each their own. Which is an important pointer as an aside here. Everything I give here is just a tip. This is an art, not a science, so if nothing I say speaks to you, don't worry about it. The other thing I do is I weed out any unnecessary words. It does happen quite a bit, in first drafts in particular, and you'll find them now and again. Distinguishing between your writer voice or leaning too much on something, the implication of phrases, a reminder to have fun with what you're doing, and just a few parting thoughts for you to keep in mind. First things first, our two main rules. Well, my two main rules. First thing you want to do is remember that you are wearing your writing hat when you're writing. I wouldn't recommend editing while you write. I do it every now and again, so if you're comfortable doing it, absolutely, but for the most part, they're two different hats, and I would keep them separate. Because the creative energy, the kind of momentum you get from writing is very, very different from going through and making sure everything's grammatically sound and is it okay for me to mention CPR in something that was based in 1920? It's not. You just want to keep that kind of thing separate. Very left brain versus right brain, and trying to do both simultaneously doesn't usually work out super, super well. And the other one is always, why this word? What word are you choosing? What are you trying to say? What does this word say? It's a basic thing. If you catch yourself questioning something or something seems odd to you, look more into it and absolutely start thinking about different synonyms. And it's something that's very intuitive, so you might not catch it right away, but it's something that you might find yourself struggling with a sentence. You want to ask yourself why. Because there's probably a word in there you can change, or it's a structure you don't like, and so on and so forth. Rewording something could absolutely solve your problem. And now we'll jump into it with redundancy. It is actually more than just repeating the same words, as it turns out. Which, like, a spell check will catch that. If you wrote the same word twice in a row, spell check will say, hey, stupid, don't do that. Hopefully not, but maybe it will. But the example I'm giving is something like several different varieties, where the word several means more than two, but not many. Different, which means they're not the same as one another, or varieties, a thing which differs in some way from others. So different varieties is redundant. Why would you say that? It's varieties, so it already includes the fact that there's various elements in there, and they're different from one another. So you don't need to say that. You would just say several varieties. And even then, varieties being plural implies there are several. The only time I would go into the distinguishment here is saying a couple varieties, which means I really only have two, or a few varieties, 3. that sort of thing. Several implies that there's enough that I've lost count, which is already implied by the word varieties, so you would really want to look at the rest of the sentence for context on this one. I picked something very simple and dry. Obviously, in a creative writing situation, this would probably be a little different. Okay. So, all in all, the other thing here I have is another kind of dry example, but they're easier to work with in cases like this. In all, the overall list has several different varieties. And within all, you have all these little arrows between overall and in all, because there's so much overlap with that. So, first off, the word in all is in the definition of overall. And the second half of that definition, taken as a whole, is the first half of in all's definition in total number. So it's a mess. Where a whole is all together, in all parts is in total number. You don't need to say in all the overall list. You would say in all the list has, or the overall list has. You don't need both. And it's a very easy trap to fall into, because you could be what I call an edit fail. You could be going through a sentence and be in the middle of restructuring it, you put something else in and go, oh, I like that. And then you don't take the other part out. So you could say, oh, this sentence needs to transition. I'll put in all in the front. It looks very lovely and sounds very sophisticated. And then you just go on your merry little way. You don't even think about the words overall list. It's not something you're worried about. Edit fail. Which I just covered. Look at that. Something like potions improve the recovery of health recovery. I love getting ahead of myself. It's one of my favorite things to do. Clearly I'm the one who made this presentation, because here we are. This sort of sentence is something where, as I described, you were in the middle of restructuring that, and then you wanted to expand on it. You did that, and didn't reread the whole sentence with your new expansion. So this is a more creative writing sort of sense of it, where you would have potions and you're describing them. This is obviously redundant, both the words and the concept. Health recovery is not a necessary distinction unless you are having different potions that do different things. Like Harry Potter versus Legend of Zelda. There's only a health potion is going to improve your health. You don't have to say that. But Harry Potter, there's all kinds of potions that do a bunch of different things, so context is everything. But that would still be a redundant sentence, I suppose. I guess. And now we are on to the give it oomph section, where you start looking at your words and go, is there a word that means this same exact thing, but like better? Just a little more pizzazz to it? A little more life. And I will elaborate on that, I promise. I know it's vague. First example is the easiest example. You've got boldness versus bravery or courage. These are their own words. Anything that has a suffix at the end, that's why I have that little note down there when looking for words like ness or lee at the end. Anything like that. You're taking a noun and just putting a suffix or an adjective and putting a suffix on the end. You want to make sure you check and see if there's a better word. That'll be a good red flag for you. Anytime you're typing something that's got a suffix, start looking for a thesaurus. Or if you're already in a momentum and you're going and you don't want to edit, write, then edit, just put it in red. Keep going and your edit self will come back to that later. But it's just a way for you to keep in mind there could be a better word out there for that. So, charging into something boldly is different than bravely or courageously. They all end in ly in that context. But if you're using it in the sense of just boldness, it switches out for bravery or courage. It has a little more of like a literary quality to it. There's something that connects better. Because it doesn't feel as much like a word that's been cobbled together. These concepts resonate more. Let's just keep going with the Harry Potter theme. Gryffindor house is a house of courage, not of boldness. Because courage has a bit more to it. It sounds and feels like the feeling you're trying to evoke. This word connects to that on a very different level than boldness. Other pitfall warning, very important. Do not put in too much oomph. There is such a thing as too much. It's just, if you were like to pour a salt shaker on something and the salt top came off, that's how this is. Sometimes you are just walking somewhere. You are not striding proudly to the bathroom. I hope. Maybe you are. Maybe that's your scene. But probably not. You've just said something. It's totally fine. One of the big stigmas in creative writing is like saying he said or she said. It's not a problem, and you shouldn't be worried about it, because most people, most of the time, are just talking. They just said something. That's it. Another big one that I see a lot is a lot of synonyms for hair and eyes. You don't need to do it. Unless you're going really, really over the top about their hair, like a Rapunzel sort of situation where their hair is magic, then you're going to go talking to things more elaborately, cascading curls, waves, that sort of thing. But you don't have to say they're lush brown tresses unless they actually have lush brown tresses, and that's an important observation that would actually be made by your point of view character. And same thing for eyes. You don't have to say azure orbs. You can just say blue eyes. Unless you're trying to convey something, there's no reason to go super over the top. If it's a love at first sight situation, you have a different thing there, but I would still avoid orbs because it's just a very odd word that kind of jars the reader out of what they're doing. They have a harder time connecting to azure orbs. What are those? Marbles. No, eyes. Got it. Especially in the context of azure orbs and luscious brown tresses. Like, it's gonna take a bit for them to figure out what you're saying, because it's just too much oomph. It's what we call purple prose. It's a lot. It's very extra. And on that subject, unnecessary words. So, like, yes, these are words you could use, but you don't have to. And this goes back to why this word. That question you should always ask yourself, what is this word doing here? What is it doing for me? If the answer is nothing, vámonos. There we go. And this one I really enjoy because it's fun. I'm a nerd, that's why. These cakes are elegant looking and delicious tasting. That problem with this is that those are obviously the things they are. You would not need to say elegant looking and delicious tasting, because, like, obviously you're not going to mix those up in this context. These cakes are as elegant as they are delicious implies that they are pretty and tasty. Most people are not going to assume it tastes elegant and looks delicious. The only reason you would say looks delicious is if you haven't eaten it yet. If you say it tastes elegant, I do that all the time, you can do that, but it's probably a character talking about it saying this tastes like elegance. That's when you would make the distinction, because elegance is not typically a flavor, more of a scene attribute or a certain character's air, the way they carry themselves. So you gotta keep that in mind. You don't have to say it if it's obvious. The implication is that someone is elegant looking, or the cakes are elegant looking. The implication with delicious is taste. You don't have to specify. Then we have this monster. I remember that now. My examples that I wrote. I remember them now. In turn, he set out once again and would not come back until the ominous threat of dawn came. In turn, he set out again and would not return until the threat of dawn. Two very different sentences with two very different objectives. I will say that this is a good one to show off a little more of that nuance of creative writing, because it is an art and not a science. The second sentence is the one that has no extra words. It is just what it is. It works very well for characters who are a little bit more jaded and down to earth. You're thinking with some grit maybe. I would say like Geralt or Orin from Final Fantasy X. Geralt is from The Witcher. Took me a bit. I swear I've seen these things. Those are the kind of characters that sentence would fit well with, because it doesn't draw things out at all. It is very to the point, and it implies a lot of emotion without going into it. So for characters who keep things close to the vest, this is a very good sentence to convey that kind of iceberg sort of emotion where you can only see the tip. That said, comes from words like the threat of dawn. This character feels menaced by the fact that dawn is coming. It could be that there's like a boss fight the next day, or it could be there's a particularly cumbersome choice they have to make the next day. That sort of situation. Versus in that first sentence, setting out once again implies a sort of tediousness and exhaustion of not wanting to do it. That is when you would be looking at that word and saying, once again is important. It shows a reluctance to have to do it again. Versus if it's just a tired acceptance, that's, again, is fine. You don't need once again. Again on its own implies it is happening a second time. Once again makes that emphasis of they don't really want to do this. They have to do it all over again. In this particular context. Now, the other part of this is like would not come back versus would not return. Would not return is one fewer word, but it also has a bit more of a formal or fantasy-esque Victorian kind of energy to it, where there's like a lords and ladies sort of vibe, versus would not come back is a bit more casual, something you and I might say. Ominous threat. This one is one that would be really hard to pitch this being a good choice, unless it's from the perspective of a character that's very purple prosy on their own. Because a threat is, of course, ominous. It's not a positive thing you would look forward to. The only way this would work is in a sentence like ominous threat of friendship. Something positive. So you're showing, really driving home and emphasizing that this positive thing is something quite menacing to this character. That's the only way you would actually be able to pull that off. In this sentence, it's very redundant and you don't need it. And I already covered the threat of dawn segment. It implies meaning. So this is a very deep and intricate sentence that comes apart really, really well, that your reader is going to just know by looking at it. The other thing to remember with word choice that I didn't actually break down in here, word for word, but is something that you should absolutely keep in mind, is that your reader does not exist in a vacuum. They're a human being. They've gone through all kinds of life experiences, and they've talked to people. They understand these kinds of things. They don't necessarily need to be told. So, for example, if the situation that's happening at dawn is you have to go fight a boss fight and the boss is your old friend. You don't have to say the threat of dawn when he would have to kill his friend Charlie. We know. Killing your friend would suck. We don't need to be told. So that's the kind of thing you want to keep in mind, because as a writer it's very tempting to over-explain and make sure you're getting a point across, but emotional poignancy with things like that absolutely is better done not said. Let the reader comprehend that for themselves. If you want to talk with them about it in OOC, absolutely gush and go wild, for the case of RPing, and comments and fanfiction, that sort of thing. Yes, go nuts. But really the major thing with Threat of Dawn and whatnot, you don't want to go too much into it. You want to let that speak for itself. Let that gravity, that bone-deep exhaustion in the Threat of Dawn, after having been out all night, now you're going to go do some awful thing you don't want to do. Let that do its own work. That's how an immersive story works with the word choice, is you make The reader builds that universe in their imagination with what you've given them. As long as you give them enough materials, they absolutely will be able to do this themselves. So if you established his friendship with Charlie, that's all set. But if you just kind of said they were friends and then now he's going to kill him, no. That kind of thing. Now let's get into the gritty fun part of gritty fun. I'll do what I want. Writer voice versus excessive use. This one is hard because your tone is what people come back to you for. So don't feel bad if you feel like you write the same themes or you have the same things you always go back to, because people are used to that. That's your brand, so to speak. It's your writer voice. People know what you're like. They know what you like to write, and they come back for that. They're not... This is opening up a jar of peanut butter and getting peanut butter. They're pleased. They're satisfied. Versus if you opened up a jar of peanut butter and it decided to be almond butter today, you would be upset. So don't worry about your writer voice being the same. But do worry if you're literally word for word writing the same sentence structure, writing with the same words, writing with the same purple prose for everybody across the board. Those kinds of things. But how do you tell the difference? Obviously, it's a habit for you, so it's going to be difficult for you to break. The example that I give, and the easiest way to do it, is to just search for it. Thank you, PowerPoint. In any case, the way you want to do this is going with the base part of a word. So that screenshot there, you'll see it has terrible, but just with the L. I never typed the E, because terribly is another form of that. So searching for it highlighted the two of them in one paragraph together. This means that I need to change one of those. This brings that to my attention. If I'm using the word terrible all the time, my whole sheet will be yellow, and I'll know exactly what I have to change by only writing part of it. Now, if I had just written up to the I in terrible, I'd be also getting like terrific or territory. So you need to be a little attentive with things like that, especially in longer works where you potentially use those words. But for the most part, just writing out part of it up to a certain point will get you all of those, and then you can clean out those words. Easy peasy. Now, the way you want to do this for sentence structure is a little different. That one you are going to have to pay more attention to the structure you're using in sentences. If you're constantly using transitional words like basically or therefore or thus, and you're getting that same system over and over again, the key you're going to want to think about a lot is the comma key. If you find yourself using ellipses a lot, every time you touch that ellipses, you got to think, oh, am I doing that again? If you use em dashes a ton, same thing. Paying attention to the punctuation that your sentence structure needs that you've been using as your crutch is your way to make sure you aren't doing that. So that's the main things you'll want to look at for word choice and sentence structure with writer voice. A short section, but a very helpful one. Now we have implication, which is one of my favorites, to be honest. That one we have butt dial versus booty call. Those are two very, very different phrases. So, I'm not going to explain them or talk about them. This is for children. Maybe. And technically they're synonymous. Those words are the same, or very similar in meaning. So that's what I'm talking about with implication. To be more specific about it, with creative writing, word choice, focus, you have words like gut versus tummy versus stomach versus abdomen versus tum-tum or belly. Those are 6 words for the same spot on your body. 6. And that's just me rambling. There's probably more. It all depends on who you're talking to or who is speaking. So both, technically. If you've got someone who's got a bit more of a rough and tumble personality, they're going to say gut to just about everybody. Doesn't matter. They might say belly to a kid. Like a little kid. If they're kind of soft around kids, then that's what they do. But if they're not, then they're going to stick with gut. if not something more disgusting sounding. And that's where it comes from. Gut is a very, well, guttural word. It sounds not as clinical as words like abdomen or even stomach, which is more of a casual term. Versus tummy is cute, as is tum-tum, and even belly. So you would categorize these different words and use them in different contexts. A mother of 9 is constantly going to be saying tummy or belly or tum-tum. Versus a doctor is probably more likely to say abdomen or stomach. So those things you want to keep in mind when you're talking about dialogue and who they're speaking to. I mean, a doctor talking to their child, for example, might still say tum-tum, because now they're talking to a child. So context and experience, the whole deal comes together when you're doing word choice, with dialogue especially. There we are. Now, in an actual sentence, the way we would do that is describing something very basically, like, use honey to sweeten your tea. This is just a suggestion. This is something you might find on the back of a box. Versus enhance the mellow, sweet flavor with honey is something you'd probably find in, like, a tea blog that's going to use words like enhance. So here we have use compared to enhance. Taken in context is how you understand the implication. Most of implication is in context. It's the way it all works. That kind of witticism, that sort of wordplay, all makes sense in context. If you take it out of context, it's a little harder to work with. So keep that in mind when you're writing things too. It doesn't always have to be confined to one sentence like in the examples I've been using. It can be stretched out across several paragraphs, several chapters. It's something that a character could have as a sort of tick or a tell. So keep that in mind. There we are, having fun with it, the part that we all want. I will go back the wrong way. In any case, we have one of my favorite examples of having fun with something. Just the concept of shut up, as defined as he explained. This tells you exactly how it was said, and the reason that works is because of the definition of the word explain in contrast with the understanding you have of the phrase shut up. Shut up is a casual phrase, and it's usually at least a little insulting, versus explaining is just something you would do. It's like, oh, 2 + 2 is 4. Explanation. It's a formality sort of situation. It shows that you know what you're talking about. Those connotations add depth to this exchange, just the one side of it. And you already know this person and how they regard other people without even knowing the other person's half of it. The surrounding part of the scene could tell you whether or not they're friends, frenemies, siblings. If there's a one-way rivalry going on, this will explain everything in the rest of that context. But shut up, he explained, tells you how it was said, versus shut up, he grumbled, implies that he has lost this argument horribly, and this is the last vestige of his defense. Just sort of tossed aside, go away, shut up, like, just get out of here. Versus explaining, that's a very dry way of putting it. So you just kind of look at someone and go, shut up. Just like, you get the hammer, you get the keys, you shut up. That's your explanation. So it conveys that tone. Readers can hear that kind of thing versus just saying, shut up, he said. This is when you would change out the verb for said. Explained, grumbled, shouted. Those are all very different. Granted, if you're going with an emotional scene like shouting, and you're worried about pacing, that's when you can drop shouted, just do an exclamation point, and you don't need to explain it. Done. That sort of situation. Always keep your context in mind. And we're already to the parting thoughts. I feel like we just started. So, one thing that, honestly, I have always grappled with my entire time writing is the concept of restoring your mana. this is just something you should do for you in general, not just in writing, and particularly these days, where you should be taking a breather if you need it. You don't have to do anything in your personal time. Yeah, obviously you have to go to work and you have to go to school and you have to do all of those things, but it's all that much more important for you to take the time to yourself to just sit on the porch and read a book, to just pet your cat, to just go for a walk. These are the sorts of things that will keep your mind in working order so that when you're ready to write, you're ready to write. And that's it. The people that you're writing with, you can always tell them, not in the brain space for this. Could be a week. No big deal. Especially if you're writing highlit. Most people don't expect a post every day. Your fanfiction followers, they'll be around. They're gonna be there. No one is gonna fall apart if they don't get your chapter right now. They'd rather you make it through to the end of the story with your mind intact. So, take a breather, get some water, have a bubble bath, whatever makes you happy. Do that, because your mind is how you write, and if you don't take care of it, you're gonna have to take like a month-long break because you pushed yourself too far, versus, what, an hour-long bath? No-brainer. So remember to restore your mana, it's very important. The other thing is to respect your pace. This is so important. I see a lot of writers who compare themselves to each other, like, oh, my friend can write 1,000 words in an hour, that's so fast, I'm so slow, I'm so terrible at this. You're not terrible. You're not. I can't say it enough. It's an art, not a science. So it's not a fact of just sitting down and saying, this is how long it takes water to boil at this elevation. Whatever, all the details that goes into that. It's not that simple. It takes work. And sometimes you're in the brain space for it, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you need to take a walk around your house or play with a cat. Walk your dog. All sorts of stuff. Talk to your fish. Do whatever works for you to help you stay in that good mindset, and then respect your pace. If you have to write one sentence every day, then that's what you do. It's not the end of the world. And your pace can change, too. I often can write anything from 800 to 1,000 words in about an hour, but I've also written like 5,000 in like 30 minutes. Just surge of creative energy, and I've done it. And there have been other days where I have written legitimately a sentence a day for like a month. It was brutal. But that's what I needed to do. That's how I was going to get through that story. And I did. My update was late, but I did it. The other thing to remember is that dialogue doesn't count. And the reason I'm saying that is for grammar. Go wild with it, especially with characters that are a little bit more playful and fun. Toss in your, I don't know. That's a sentence that someone would actually say. But someone a little bit more unsure of themselves. That sort of situation. You don't have to keep to grammar as closely with dialogue, is the main thing you want to take away from this, because otherwise you end up with characters that sound like they talk from a dictionary because they're too grammatically accurate. So feel free to go a little bit wild with things like that. It does depend on the character, of course. If you're writing someone very, very serious, very well educated, the odds of them just ignoring grammar are very, very slim. But they might. It really depends on personality. So keep all of that in mind. Don't feel like you have to follow grammar. As long as the character is comprehensible, you're fine. And here we are. This is the last stretch of it. If you have questions, I'm at JamBloot on all of those platforms. I will say Tumblr is mostly me just reblogging things that appeal to me. Instagram is mostly cosplay and cats. Facebook is mostly fan fiction, occasional analysis, some original fiction now and again. And Twitter is exclusively writing and analysis, so all of that. And my website lets you see all of the above. You can tip me on coffee if you have that means, if this works for you, if you really enjoyed it and you want to see more things like this. That helps me out a ton. But the other option, of course, is if you are interested in the story side of things for original fiction, that's when you become a patron. Becoming a patron doesn't support fanfiction because I don't necessarily like making income off of someone else's creative property. Consistent income, anyway. But all of my creative fiction is there. So you don't have to. But if you have time and you'd like to do that, want to take a look, you can also just follow it. I post my free stuff there too. So whichever platform is really easier for you to follow me on or reach out to me on, those are all open to you. Alright, and if you have any other questions, as you know, there I am.